Okay, thank you everyone for joining us this morning for the CRIN Low Emission Fuels and Products Information Webinar delivered by Foresight Clean Tech Accelerator and the Delphi Group. And firstly, in the spirit of respect, reconciliation and truth, I'd like to acknowledge that we live, work and play on traditional land. And as this is a virtual event, we acknowledge that attendees are located across Canada, but we're located on the unceded, ancestral and occupied traditional lands of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, Solo and Squamish First Nations. And we encourage you to research what traditional land you are situated on and look at making or finding your own land acknowledgement to use. Okay, I'd like now to introduce our speakers for today's webinar. So my name is Lorna Pelly and I'm the project manager for this competition at Foresight. And we're going to be joined today by Joy Romero, the president of CRIN and the vice president of technology and innovation with Canadian Natural. And along with Joy, there'll be Dave Schick, who's the technology theme area lead for CRIN's Cleaner Fuels technology theme and the vice president for Western Canada at the Canadian Fuels Association. And later in the presentation, you'll hear from Christine O'Reilly at the Delphi Group, who's working with us to deliver this competition and managing the evaluation process. After the presentation, we'll take questions, and on the question panel, you will have the opportunity to hear from Ian Jobe, the Director of Operations at CRIN, David Sanguinetti, the Vice President of Technology at Foresight, and Danielle Tardif, the Operations Coordinator at CRIN. And Danielle is happy to take any questions in French, should that be required. Okay, so before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. We're in webinar mode, so all the attendees are muted and off camera, and you'll remain so throughout the webinar just to manage background noise. If you have any issues during the webinar with audio, please email events@foresightcic.com and our tech support will be happy to help you. We ask that all questions are typed into the Q&A function, and you can find that in the panel at the bottom of your screen. We'll be answering some questions by typing answers as we go, but we'll leave most for an open panel discussion at the end of the presentation. I also want to let you know that the webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on our competition website later this week. So if you need to drop off or have any colleagues that are unable to attend, you can watch the recording later on. Okay, I'd like now to explain the agenda for this webinar and the subject items we're going to talk through. So firstly, we're going to hear from CRIN about the ambition and the context for this competition. And I'll then explain the competition purpose and the focus areas for the projects we'd like to receive. I'll run over the key dates that you need to be aware of, and I'll explain the eligibility criteria that's required for all applications. And I want to make sure that everyone's clear on how to apply. Finally, Christine will talk us through the evaluation methods and how the review phases will be managed. And then we'll have plenty of time at the end for some questions. Okay, so to get things started, I would like now to hand over to Joy Romero and Dave Schick from CRIN to introduce the competition.
So I'd like to welcome you all. Hello, bonjour, I'm Joy Romero. I'm president of the Clean Resource Innovation Network, or CRIN, and vice president of technology innovation at Canadian Natural Resources Limited.
I'm Dave Schick, vice president of Western Canada for the Canadian Fuels Association and lead of CRIN's technology theme area for cleaner fuels, reducing carbon intensity. Bienvenue and welcome to CRIN's $25 million technology competition for lower emission fuels and products.
This competition is one of three in CRIN's $80 million program for 2021, aimed at priority environmental and economic challenges within Canada's oil and gas sector, and made possible by the Government of Canada's Strategic Innovation Fund.
We're very pleased to be here with you today to welcome you, technology developers, entrepreneurs, researchers, innovators, oil and gas producers, and service providers from across Canada. This is truly a pan-Canadian cross-sectoral effort and opportunity. And a special welcome to participants from other sectors like mining, steel, cement, forestry, agriculture, and manufacturing, and a few from other countries as well. CRIN's competitions encourage diverse participation and cross-sector collaborative solutions, so all are welcome.
Each of your projects are at technology readiness level 6 through 9, which means you and your teams have already worked very hard and invested for many years to get to this point. CRIN's competitions are intended to help bring your work through the commercialization stage to widespread adoption. Reaching this phase of development is an exciting achievement for any project. For industry, these competitions could accelerate your R&D efforts through the commercialization stage while also leveraging your existing funding, improving investor awareness of your sustainability efforts, and improving cost competitiveness for your operations.
For innovators, getting your technology tested in the field and through commercialization will help validate and de-risk your project for other investors. And importantly, help to meet our nation's emissions reduction targets, build resilience to a changing climate, and improve both the competitiveness and environmental performance of Canadian companies. When innovators and producers collaborate, you're also creating a body of work and developing knowledge and skills that will position Canada's clean tech industry as global leaders, ready for export, and with the ability to attract additional investment. In short, your work here matters. And it matters that we all work together to make it happen. There is no single area or single project that will solve the environmental and economic challenges we face. Only by working together, including diverse perspectives and approaches, can we achieve Canada's climate goal.
This about. We are a pan-Canadian network of networks focused on ensuring Canada's energy resources can be sustainably developed and integrated into global energy systems. We facilitate connections and amplify ideas and expertise that will produce breakthrough solutions for global challenges. CRIN's mandate is to develop the innovation ecosystem and facilitate the pathways that enable technology development and faster adoption.
Solution providers, by working with CRIN's network and collaborating with the oil and gas sector, you are in the best position to make the biggest impact. While the industry is a large contributor of emissions, it is also the largest private sector investor in research and development in Canada, contributing up to 75% of investment each year. It is also the first line to tackle environmental issues, as evidenced by the strong tradition of large-scale innovation in support of the vision of a clean hydrocarbon future. Coupling the investment at field testing facilities with their innovative solutions contributes to the global energy transformation.
Because all of your projects are at technology readiness level 6 through 9, you likely already have an industry partner. However, if you don't, please reach out to the competition coordinators who will then work with the CRIN network to try and find a match for you.
Speaking of communication and other processes, this is a good time to mention the fairness, confidentiality, and IP protections that are in place, and which about you will learn more today. Each of CRIN's competitions is administered by an independent coordinator who recruits and screens all reviewers for technical expertise and conflict of interest. External fairness monitors oversee the entire competition process, and CRIN volunteer members, like myself, have been kept at arm's length to ensure no conflict of interest or insider advantage, and which allows the more than 2,100 members of CRIN's network to compete on a fair basis.
Unfortunately, not every applicant project will receive funds from the CRIN's large-scale competitions. This is not a reflection of the value of your work, nor of the potential for significant environmental, economic, and public benefits to come from your projects. In addition to the competitions, please make use of your CRIN membership to connect, collaborate, and partner with others across the innovation ecosystem for ideas, skills, guidance, and even other sources of funding to complete your projects.
Today's webinar and the competition guide documents will provide you with all the details you need to apply. Thank you everyone for being here, for your interest in CRIN, and for your participation in the competitions. We wish you the best of luck. Lastly, but not least, thank you for the hardworking team at Foresight Clean Tech Accelerator, and the Delphi Group, the administrators of this competition and our host for today's event. With that, we'll turn it back to you, Lorna.
Great, thank you so much, Joy and Dave, for that introduction. And now let's start getting into the details of this competition. So, as you've just heard, CRIN is working to develop innovative technological solutions to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of the oil and gas industry. And we're seeking applications to help deliver this goal from across Canada. Foresight and the Delphi Group are supporting CRIN in this ambition by running this competition in partnership. I hope by now everyone's had a chance to look at the competition website, and in particular to read through the program guide and the FAQs. If not, I encourage you to do so, as this is where you should find all the information you need to apply for this competition. This competition is one of 3 innovation competitions being run by CRIN this year. The other 2 are Reducing Environmental Footprint, a competition launched on March the 24th with up to $50 million available, and the Digital Oil and Gas competition, which will be launched on May the 18th with up to $5 million available. We encourage you to go to CRIN's website and to review the other competitions and assess which is the most appropriate for your project. To be clear, you can apply for different competitions with different projects, but we ask that each single project you only apply to one of the CRIN competitions, as you can only receive funding from one stream. So please take your time to figure out which is the most suitable one for your project. The expression of interest for this competition is now open, and the deadline for expression of interest applications is Wednesday, June the 9th at 3 p.m. Pacific time. So please make sure you've noted that cutoff point for the time zone that you are in. This competition is looking to support technological solutions that will develop new fuels or products from the oil and gas industry, whilst delivering a significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. There's 4 main areas of interest that we're looking at for this competition, and these are innovative products from hydrocarbons, carbon capture and utilization, hydrogen and geothermal, and low carbon intensity alternatives and new fuels. And we encourage you to read through the detailed explanations of these focus areas in the program guide and make sure that your project fits well within at least one of them. It's fine to cross over to more than one focus area, but we do ask in the application form for you to state the primary focus area, and that's just to help us categorize your application best. Okay, and these are the key dates for the competition that you need to plan towards. So the deadline for submitting an expression of interest application, as I said earlier, is Wednesday, June the 9th at 3 p.m. Pacific time. And this deadline will not be moved, and we will not accept late applications. Following that, we'll run through the review process, and we plan to have a short list of applicants invited to go through to full proposal stage by July 26th. And then we'll start the full proposal phase of competition on August the 5th. This will close at the end of September, and then we go through to the second review phase, and our final recommendations for award will be made to CRIN by the end of the year to have winners announced in January 2022. I also want to note that all projects that are successfully funded by the competition will need to be completed by March 31st, 2024. And that includes all your reporting and the submission of deliverables. Okay, so now let's run through the eligibility criteria, which are the baseline requirements that we expect from all applications. So firstly, for this competition, as Joy noted earlier, we'd like all projects to be at TRL level of 6 to 9. You can find our descriptions of these stages of developments in section 2.3 of the program guide. If you don't meet this criteria, you can stay in touch with CRIN for future competitions, but if you're not at TRL level 6 to 9 yet, this competition is not for you. Secondly, we ask that your project has at least a minimum of 25% industry partner funding and no more than 75% government funding from all sources. So if you have government funding from other sources, this needs to be accounted for within the funding breakdown. Next, your project has to be relevant to at least one of the 4 focused areas that I highlighted earlier. You must demonstrate a clear commercialization pathway, and there's an opportunity to present this within the questions in the application form. Your funding request from CRIN should be no more than $10 million, and I'll explain a bit more about the funding criteria in the next slide. And finally, we ask that all applicants must be a member of CRIN. So CRIN membership is free and open to anyone, and you can easily apply on the CRIN website. And it's a good way of staying in touch with CRIN, and you can receive their newsletter and keep up to date with any funding announcements. Okay, so now let's talk a bit more about the funding available. So firstly, within the application form, we ask that all applicants state and justify the amount of funding that they'll be requesting from CRIN. And this can be up to $10 million in this competition with no minimum requirement. It can also be up to 50% of your eligible costs. And again, you'll be asked to give a breakdown of your budget in the application form. Within this, a minimum of 25% of funding must come from industry partners, and 75% can come from a mixture of public and private sources. And this part would include any funding from CRIN. It's important to note that CRIN has no obligation to meet your funding request, and they can choose at their discretion to fund that amount or less. And I want to remind you again that any one individual project should apply for only one CRIN competition, as you cannot receive funding from multiple streams for the same project. And as a final detail with all projects, the combined level of funding from all federal, provincial, territorial and municipal government sources cannot exceed 75% of eligible costs for any of the industry collaborators, but it can be 100% of eligible costs for any academic collaborator. Okay, so who can apply for this competition? Well, the competition is open to receiving applications from a really broad range of organisations across Canada. So whether you're a technology developer, an academic institution, an Indigenous organisation or an SME, you are welcome to apply and to form consortiums of any mixture of organisations. Our only stipulation is that we require each project consortium to have at least one SME and one oil and gas producer within their group. And that's a requirement of all applications, and the definition of what constitutes an SME and an oil and gas producer is provided on page 2 of the programme guide. And just to be clear, we ask in the application form for one organisation to act as a lead applicant, and this is just for communication purposes. And this organisation can be any member of your consortium. Okay, I want to say a bit about project location. So this competition is designed to support pan-Canadian projects. All projects supported through this competition must demonstrate a clear and justified value proposition for economic, environmental and public benefits in Canada. Technology solutions can originate from anywhere globally, but they must be piloted, demonstrated or implemented in Canada. So in terms of where your organisations and collaborators are located, you're not required to have any operations in any particular province or territory. However, your lead applicant, your SME and your oil and gas producer must be incorporated to the laws of Canada. We also ask that costs occurring outside of Canada should not exceed 10% of the total eligible costs for each funded project. So please consider this requirement when structuring your budget breakdown. A little bit about the application form. So the application form can be accessed via the competition website. It's an online form and you can sign up and register and start one now and continue to work on it until you're finished. And then when you're done, you simply press the submit button. Once you've submitted, you cannot make any changes. You can delete your application and start again, but once it's submitted, it's done. But just to be clear, nothing will be evaluated before June the 9th. Within the application form, there are three main sections of questions: innovation opportunity, impact, and implementation. And the overall weighting for each of these sections is provided in the form, so you can understand the parts that hold greater importance. Your answers are limited in length by a character count, and that's controlled within the form. Letters of support can be uploaded as attachments and they're not included in the character count. And we're happy to receive applications in either English or French, but we ask that you complete the application form either completely in English or completely in French. And just to reassure you, all the information that you submit in your application form will be treated as confidential and can only be viewed by people who have signed non-disclosure agreements. Okay, I'd like now to pass over to Christina O'Reilly at Delphi, who's going to talk us through the evaluation process.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Lorna. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christina O'Reilly at Delphi, and I'm just going to be talking to you a little bit about how we've set up the competition to run and the evaluation process. And as Lorna mentioned earlier, Delphi and Foresight are collaborating together on this competition, and Delphi is managing the evaluation of the competition. So we've already recruited a number of independent subject matter experts who will be used to evaluate the applications for both the EOI and FPP phases. They have expertise in all four focus areas, or they might also have commercialization or business experience, technology development, or emission reduction management expertise. Basically, we're bringing all reviewers together in June and July to review all received applications, and there will be a shortlisting process where applications will then be invited forward to complete a full project proposal or FPP. And we really want to stress that there's no set distribution between the focus areas of projects that will be moving forward into the FPP. Essentially, the highest scoring applications will be going forward regardless of the project content. And once we're in the full project proposal phase, applicants will be assigned an independent coach who will then mentor them throughout the phase of the FPP and assist them with their application in that phase. Again, the coaches will be independent and they'll have expertise in technology development, engineering, entrepreneurship. And the second evaluation phase will also involve an interview in a panel setting. So basically a presentation to the reviewers, and final recommendations for an award will then be sent to CRIN, at which point it will then be CRIN's discretion how they decide to award applicants. And I would also like to stress that throughout this process, both the expression of interest and the full proposal phase, it's being observed by an independent fairness evaluator who's going to ensure that we're carrying out all the evaluations in a fair and honest manner. And now I'll just review a little bit kind of how we've set up the competition to run. And anyone who has participated in various funding programs before, this will look very familiar to you. We've set it up to run in a two-phase process. There's an expression of interest phase as well as a full project proposal phase. So the expression of interest is currently live, and we invite you to view the questions and the application form that's already online on the website for the competition. And as Lorna mentioned before, the competition will close on June 9th for the EOI phase. And the applications will then be reviewed by independent evaluators in June and July. They'll ultimately be reviewed, discussed, and then scored. We expect that this will be a very competitive process and that there'll be more applications submitted than there is funding available. So we make that all of your questions are answered clearly. You give lots of evidence for your answers. And again, the highest scoring applications will be invited to submit a full project proposal, and all other applicants will be notified of their decision via email to the lead applicant of whether or not they're being invited to submit an FPP or not. And the full proposal applications will then be carried out in August and September. with the presentation and panel interview taking place in October. And this application, so the FPP application, will be asking for much greater level of detail than the EOI, and we'll be asking for more detailed budgets, more detailed explanations, as well as calculations and assumptions to back up things like, your greenhouse gas calculations. So keep this in mind during your EOI application phase, that all of the, areas you're outlining for your project will need to be described in even greater detail in the FPP phase. And as I mentioned earlier, all of the project teams that move forward to the FPP phase will be assigned an independent coach to mentor them through that process, and they'll be available to help them during the application setup, as well as to prep for the interview or presentation. And at the end of this process, again, we'll use independent experts to evaluate our applications, and they'll ultimately be the ones recommending the projects that will be awarded funding from CRIN. Applicants who are unsuccessful at the FPP stage will receive a feedback discussion where they'll be offered advice on how to move forward with next steps. This will not happen for the EOI phase applicants. You will not receive any feedback. And any funded projects will then go on to finalize a work plan and a contribution agreement with CRIN, and funding will be made available to projects on a milestone basis. And these projects will be required to report and monitor your progress. And you are required, as Lorna mentioned, to have all your work and reporting complete by March 31st, 2024, with a final project completion report. And lastly, we just want to give a few tips and suggestions for how to submit a high quality application. As Lorna mentioned earlier, we really recommend that you thoroughly read through the program guide and the FAQs on the website. There's currently a lot of FAQs already posted. So a lot of the information that you may be wondering about can be found within these documents. So make sure you give them a good read. Spend some time figuring out what the best partners for your consortium would be. This could be probably the most time-consuming part. And if you're having difficulties possibly finding some partners, contact us, and CRIN may be able to help with some matchmaking, as Joy mentioned earlier. When you're filling in your application form, make sure you're using succinct and clear language to describe your project and any impacts or outcomes. If you've been working on this project, for years, and you're well versed in the subject matter, and you're reviewing your content, and you're having a difficult time, understanding what it is that you've written, imagine a reviewer who's getting this for the first time. They don't have a lot of time to review and figure out what it is you're trying to say. So make sure your language is very clear. And lastly, get familiar with the application form and the platform, how everything works. And we definitely suggest that you're not leaving your submission to the final deadline date of June 9th. So be aware of that. If any applications can't be submitted on the 9th because the system goes down or something like that, we won't be able to help you or accept your application, unfortunately. So that should just be something you're aware of. If you're leaving it to the last minute and you have some need for technical support on the last day, that could be quite challenging. So lastly, we really look forward to receiving your applications, and I'll pass it back to Lorna to finish things off and open the Q&A.
Great, thanks, Christine. So just before we start the panel questions, I just want to let you know that how we'll be managing questions going forward. So if your question doesn't get answered today, and please do start typing some questions in the Q&A, but if it doesn't get answered today, or if you have any follow-up questions, you can email these to our competition email, which is crincompetition@foresightcac.com. So these questions will be answered in written form and we'll publish them anonymously at the bottom of the FAQ document each week. So that way all applicants can view any new questions. And also if you register your email on the mailing list, which is also linked on our competition website, we'll notify you every time we update our FAQs. So that's just how we'll be dealing with FAQ, any questions going forward. But now please do put some questions in the question and answer panel, and I'm going to invite on our question panel. So we have Ian Job, the Director of Operations at CRIN, and David Sanguinetti, the Vice President of Technology at Foresight, and Danielle Tardif, the Operations Coordinator at CRIN. So we now have our question panel ready to go.
And good morning, good afternoon, depending on your time zones. Yes.
Exactly. Okay, so we've already got lots of questions coming in, which is great. And I think I'm going to start you off at the top. So there's obviously going to be questions about how the consortium should be set up. And we've got a question about, could an operating chemical plant that's not an oil and gas producer apply?
I think, well, let's get back to the basic eligibility. I'll take a cut at this, and David, please fill in any gaps that I may miss. But one of the key criteria in eligibility is to partner up with an oil and gas producer. So the answer is must be an oil and gas producer as part of the consortium.
Yeah. So I think that's quite clear that yes, it could apply, but you have to do that with an oil and gas producer.
Yeah, partner up, right? And find that partner. And maybe to that just to build on that, Janice, you've got a couple of questions in the Q&A there around partnering and looking for the questions there. And I think I read Janice is wanting to answer that question live. Are you wanting to pipe in right now, Janice, and have a comment around the partnering activity that you lead?
My intent was that one of the panelists could respond to that, because there are a number of questions related with similar.
Well, all right. Well, then now that I got you on, anyways, this is Janice. This is the live voice behind the coordination of those questions. So please reach out to the website CRIN competition at foresightcsc.com and put your request in there. Then this will get to Janice, and she will be working with her team in the background, matchmaking, providing warm introductions as best as possible to help people connect, partner up, and be eligible for this competition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a couple of questions on helping people set up their consortium. And I think the answer is yes, CRIN are able to do that. I don't think there's any plan for a big matchmaking event at the moment, but if you get in contact and tell us what your needs are, then we'll do our best to help you out.
Yeah, so Luke, hopefully that answered your question, Luke, that you were asking. Go ahead, David.
I was just going to add that step one on that is CRIN membership. Because once you're a member of CRIN, then you can access the membership lists and do your own matchmaking there. Well,
what a team, Dave. Thanks. Usually I get that in there, but no, that's awesome. And please, yes, that's another opportunity. I think Joy and Dave both mentioned it in their introductory remarks. Please join, sign up on the social contract and get involved and be part of that community and learn who else is already committed to be part of this broader innovation ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So we've got a couple of questions on project location. So let's try and cover those. So we've got one asking, can a consortium include non-Canadian companies if the SME an oil and gas producer is incorporated in Canada? And then sort of related, just to be clear, government is domestic, not international.
Those are two different questions. I know Richard was asking the latter one. It's domestic, but I would offer is find out from your non-domestic or foreign funder if this is in conflict with their intention of the use of proceeds that you've got from non-domestic funds. But we are looking at maximum 75% government, meaning domestic. So that includes CRIN funds. With respect to where the work is to be done, it's clear that no less than 90% of the work is to be done in Canada. Yes, the SME and the oil and gas producer, and I'll even go as far as all ultimate recipients must be Canadian entities. Okay, so that either incorporated in Canada or in a province or a territory of Canada. Certainly, there could be there's thoughts about foreign contributions, but I'll say basically the rules are the ultimate recipients are to be Canadian entities and members of CRIN.
Okay. Thank you.
Answers the questions.
Yeah, and there's a question here about can the development of a software package designed to simplify and clarify compliance requirements for low carbon fuel programs, and how would they get help in determining which is the best competition? So I guess it's how do we support applicants in figuring out what's the best competition for them?
Yeah, there's sort of a tell me more response to that one, and I think that was from Brad. And Brad, so I would offer and invite you to reach out to the CRIN at CRIN competition at foresight.ca.com and maybe tell your story a little bit more in a non-confidential way. It could be the digital oil and gas competition that's yet to be launched, depending on the scope. But again, we are asking that not any one project be submitted to multiple competitions, but to one, hence your question. So I'd offer is to tell us a little bit more, and we'll try to give you an answer that will help you guide you forward.
Okay. So yeah, so get in touch and CRIN can support you in that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, question here. Can the use of offshore renewable power be considered eligible for this competition?
Without knowing more, Dave, without knowing more about, I would just say eligible, yes, if you're partnering with an oil and gas producer. It seems to be a standard response, but that said, it is very important that the requirements for this competition is, regardless of the project area, that you have an SME and an oil and gas producer. And as described in the guide, that oil and gas producer could be an SME as well, if it meets the definition of this.
I would also highlight in the guide, there are detailed descriptions. Lorna went through them quickly, but there are detailed descriptions of 4 focus areas that this competition is looking at. And pay attention to those. And if you genuinely believe that your project is going to present a solution in one of those 4 areas, please submit. But if in an honest evaluation it doesn't, then you're not going to score very well. So perhaps it's not worth coming in with that project, and you may need to adjust it a bit in order to actually get the right sort of score you need to proceed in the competition.
Thanks, David.
Okay, thank you. So we've got a question about the costs, which is great. So just so we can cover that. So just to be clear, does the 10% of costs incurred outside of Canada requirement, can that include equipment that might be purchased to be installed in Canada, but it has to be purchased from outside of Canada?
I direct you to I mean, perhaps you've already been there, but and I can't remember who was asking that question. The screen's moving quickly, which is fantastic. Is go take a peek at Appendix A, eligible costs, starting on page 15 of the program guide. That said, building enhancements are eligible costs. So take a look at that. And if you really want to learn more and be definitive, we'll do our best to help you give that yes or no answer. Without knowing more details as to what it is and how it's impactful to your overall budget, it's pretty hard to say, but it looks like it could be. Just be thoughtful of the 10% limits. That said, it is coming into Canada. So we'll have to look at that very specific question.
Okay. A question about why is the TRL limited to 6 as a minimum? Just if there's thinking behind
well, that. What's the first thinking behind that is one of the key drivers for CRIN, and particularly for these 80 million of competitions, is to drive through commercialization and to drive adaptation in a short period of time for the oil and gas industry to be part of that transformational energy future. So we believe 6 and the requirement to show pathway to commercialization is critical for us to meet and get through those commercialization gates and stages in a reasonable period of time to reap the benefits that we will be asking all ultimate recipients, those folks who are successful in receiving funding from CRIN, to provide benefit reporting on an annual basis against KPIs that are from environmental, be it greenhouse gas emissions, to land and water intensity, to also economic and societal benefits. So we require that these projects drive and create benefits for society and the environment. So we believe that 6 is the threshold.
Okay, thank you. And a good clarifying question here. So if a single producer has 2 projects, i.e. hydrogen and geothermal, as well as innovative products from hydrocarbons, could they apply for both? Are they considered the same competition, or should they only apply for one of the 2? So a same producer has separate projects. How do they handle that?
Well, I mean, perhaps the proponent, I guess, as a researcher myself back in the day, I would give some thought as to how you approach that, your strategic approach to the higher probability of success for funding. Maybe they're discrete work, so therefore they're discrete projects, and therefore you could say it is part of the same competition as per the focus areas as David. So they are different projects, so it's not the same project. So that's point 1. Give some thought as to what does this portfolio of projects look like that might create some synergies. So David.
Yeah, it does spell out in the project guide that one company is allowed to submit or participate in more than one project. So that's perfectly eligible. You can only apply to one competition with any given project, but you can apply multiple times with different projects. Make sure you meet all the other eligibility requirements on each project individually. But if you've got partners for each of those technologies and you've got totally separate projects, go for it.
That's the technical. Thanks, David. It gives some strategic thinking too as to how you might want to position your projects.
Okay, a quick answer to Robert Clark. Do you have a list of eligible partners? I would say sign up to CRIN first and you'll be able to look at their directory. And if you don't see what you're looking for there, then you can get in contact with us and we'll speak to CRIN about finding you an eligible partner.
Well done, well done.
And then moving on, we've got a couple of questions about the definition of an oil and gas producer. So I don't know if one of you wants to take that. This is something that's already come up. So is an oil and gas producer a refiner of hydrocarbon fuels, or are they just an extractor? So we do have a definition in the program guide of what we see as an oil and gas producer.
What page is that on? I've got the definition in front of me. I just don't know where it is.
On page 2, right at the front.
Oh, it's page 2. So no, it's upstream, midstream, and downstream. It's from source to end use in simplest of terms. So it could be a transport pipeline company as long as it's petroleum. It could be extraction, and it could be, like you say, downstream manufacturing and sale of hydrocarbon-based products.
Okay. So yeah, we do have a look at the program guide and look at that definition. And if you still have questions from that, then drop us an email. Okay, question here again about the project funding. So the minimum 25% of project funding that must come from industry collaborators. Can the applicant fund all the actual money required for the project with industry collaborators making contributions in kind? For example, feedstock for the technology and low carbon fuel offtake.
So I would offer is please again take a look at Appendix A in the program guide, but no, in kind is not an eligible supported cost. So that's pretty straightforward. So it needs to be a direct cash contribution, minimum 25% of the project budget.
Okay.
It doesn't mean obviously it could be part of the grander project, but it's not eligible as part of that 25%.
Okay, thank you. The email to reach out for consortium help. So go to our email first, the CRIN competition email, and we'll put you in contact with the right people. Okay.
We'll do our best. I'll put a little caveat there.
We'll
do our best, but we can't guarantee a partnership. But that said, we'll do our best to make sure that everybody's as successful as possible.
Okay. David, maybe this one's for you. So concerning the TRL level 6, which we do have a definition of in the guide, but would you be able to say, you know, in your own words, what you're looking for to meet a TRL level 6?
Definition of TRL 6, it has nothing to do with the scale, like size or output per day. That is not what defines the TRL level. TRL level is explicitly spelled out both in the guide and in Industry Canada. Industry Canada is no longer the right name, but the
it's Innovation, Science, and Industry, ISI.
Innovation, there you go. But they spell out the definition for TRL, and that's the definition that we follow. It has to do with how far advanced your technology is. It's not the scale of production, it's how close it is to commercial.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully that answers your question. Quick clarification on the 25% minimum funding from an industry partner. This is probably for you, Ian. Can the industry partner be an investor, or do they have to be a partner, part of the consortium?
Investors can certainly be part of the consortium. That said, we do need an industry. We need an innovator and an oil and gas producer. If the consortium feels that there's a value to have an investor partner to be part of that, then and your project meets the minimum project eligibility, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Someone's asked about the scoring and weighting criteria. So that's available in the application form. So if you jump into the application form, you'll see the weighting for each of the 3 areas.
Is that section 5, Dave? I think, is that evaluation?
That's actually in the application form itself.
Okay.
So if you go onto the website of the competition, then there's a link there to take you to the application form, sign in the application form, and each of the questions shows the weighting.
Okay, thank you. Question about the partnership with the oil and gas producer. So is there a lower limit to the involvement they must have? So can they have a relatively low involvement compared to others in the consortium?
I'll start, and I'm sure Dave will have some thoughts on this one. This is a strategic question. Is there a minimum? No. Is there something that you might want to consider from a project proposal that you want them to be engaged? And if they're engaged, then it enhances your probability of success and progression through the TRLs, through to commercialization. And hence, in my opinion anyways, would create higher value to that project. You just don't want them to be a token. You want them to be active, engaged partners.
Yeah, I would phrase it as part of the evaluation does require demonstration of the likely success of the project.
And we're also asking for a delineation of roles and responsibilities of
Yes.
folks in the program.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. David, I don't know if you want to pick this one up about geothermal. So just a bit more description about whether it's that hydrogen needs to be hydrocarbon derived, or the geothermal can also be hydrocarbon derived.
So I'm not seeing that written. So
came in at 941.
Okay, wording relative is it's clear that hydrogen needs to be hydrocarbon derived. So geothermal, okay, conventional geothermal with an oil field application, I think would be acceptable. From the perspective that if it has an application in conventional oil and gas, then oil field, then that would be making use of the existing oil and gas infrastructure, and that's the requirement.
Okay.
Does that concur with your understanding, Ian?
Yeah, that would be fine. Yeah, I was just looking at Janice's questions. You made me think there for a minute there, Lorna. I had to convert from Pacific to Mountain.
Okay, sorry.
Truly pan-Canadian. We're not quite. We're still Western Canada, but let's get a question from St. John's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so quick one here about the SME, and then we'll go on to IP. So could the SME be a subsidiary of a multinational entity? Does that still make them an SME?
Yes. Oh, a partner can be a subsidiary of an international M&E. That's a good question.
Yeah, we might have to come back on that.
Yeah. We think of separate entities as an SME of less than 499 employees or less, as part of a larger global M&E. Let us put that in an FAQ.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that question.
Yes.
Okay, and then a question here about the IP. So it's a good one to cover. How is CRIN in the evaluation period? What steps are taken by CRIN to protect the IP? And the other question relates to the limitations, which are in section 3.7 about the 5 years on the sale or licensing of technologies outside Canada. So can we just discuss these restrictions and be clear on that?
So the first part of the question was protecting, is this foreground or background IP that an SME brings to the table? Mm-hmm. That could be, and so remains the ownership of the ultimate recipients and the partners who are bringing that to the table, and it's certainly with them to continue to protect that. But that said, we need voluntarily register that IP as foreground into a depository so that we understand what projects bring to the table. So that would be held in a confidential way. Going to project IP, which is IP that's generated during the project, the funded project, it does need to remain. There's a few things that are very clear here. Ownership of project IP must remain with a Canadian identity for a minimum of 5 years after the end of the project completion. Okay. So we've spoken to March 31st, 2024 as a timeline, March 31st, 2024 as the end of CRIN funding, but the project end might be a little different date, and that's a date that the project proposal needs to identify. But 5 years from that period of time, it needs to remain with a Canadian identity. Now, there are a couple of exceptions. The sale or transfer of ownership of said company approved by the minister, or at the time of project selection, the ultimate recipient is a subsidiary of a non-Canadian entity parent company. But the ultimate recipient's parent company may retain ownership of the project IP, providing that the Canadian identity in Canada retains a free of charge licensing rights or use of the IP. Also, there's another piece around cannot be sold or exclusively outside of Canada to a non-Canadian identity. If that happens, there will be some penalties, and those details will be very detailed, provided in the ultimate recipient. And those penalties could range from reimbursement of 100% of the funds awarded up to 300% of the funds awarded.
Okay. So yeah, please do read through that the agreement attachment at the bottom of the program guide, because that's where the IP requirements are clearly set out. And if you have any more questions, then please get in touch. And then just a couple of questions here about the funding criteria again. So if a Canadian SME receives investment from abroad, does that disqualify it? And does the 90% criteria for funding to be spent within Canada apply only to contribution from CRIN, or does it apply to the total project costs?
Well, I'll answer that last one first. It's total project costs.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think you broke up a little bit there for me. I think my internet might be a little wonky here, but other questions, Lorna, please.
So if a Canadian SME receives investment from abroad, does that disqualify it? Okay.
I think, again, we have to get back into that Canadian identity piece, incorporation.
Okay.
Great questions.
And then lastly, for a project to be completed by March 2024, does that apply to the overall project execution or only to the portion of the project for which the CRIN funding has been sought?
So thank you to an anonymous attendee for that question. So that's further to what I was just saying. It's CRIN funding ends March 31st, 2024. Should the project proposal require to have a completion date any different from that? It can be different from that. And that's when the clock starts ticking from, and the project continues with partner funding in order to get to that closure and then start getting into that benefit phase for the project. So March 31st, 2024 is the deadline for CRIN funding contribution to the project.
Okay, and then lastly, just a couple more to finish up with about the producers. So we've had one ask, would a coal power producer qualify? And someone else ask, is a gas supplier eligible as a partner? So I guess, again, we're referring back to the definition of the oil and gas producer.
Coal is not oil and gas per se, I guess. If you look at upstream exploration and hydrocarbon resources, yeah, could be, I guess.
It says
go
a
ahead,
coal
Dave.
power producer.
Coal power. Well, that's different, not mining, right?
Yeah. So I think a coal producer may qualify, but a coal power producer, I would say that's different.
Yeah. And then was the other one was around gas, Laura?
Gas supplier.
A gas supplier, are they eligible?
That's distribution of a hydrocarbon. I think
that's
that
midstream. It's midstream, yeah.
Okay. All right, just looking at the time, I think that's all we've got time for today, but we will we'll take all these questions and we'll make sure that they're answered and added to the FAQ. And if you have any follow-up questions, as I said, do get in contact with us. So just to finish up now, I just want to say thank you everybody for attending this morning. Please visit our competition website and read through the program guide and the FAQ. As I said, get in touch with us if you have any further questions, and do make sure you've added your email address to our mailing list so that you'll be notified of any changes. We encourage you to start an application form as soon as you can, get familiar with how the form works and the questions. And as I said at the start, we'll be posting a recording of this webinar on our website in the next few days. And so with that, at 10 o'clock, I just want to say on behalf of CRIN and Foresight and the Delphi Group, thank you everyone for joining us this morning, and we look forward to receiving your applications.